Let's go.
Okay, easy. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Excited to talk to you or talk with you guys today about MEV on Ethereum. My name is John. I'm a founding researcher at Sorella Labs. So what Sorella does is we basically create MEV mitigating mechanisms for like AMMs, right? So I'll delve a bit deeper into that later on in the presentation, but yeah, let's just get right into it off the bat. Yep. Um, Okay, so yeah, you guys kind of got a bit of an intro on me. Today we're gonna be talking about MEV on Ethereum specifically. So, uh, the roadmap for this talk is basically going to be first going over what is MEV, right? The forms of MEV, the history behind it, and what does it look like today? So before I get into it, I kind of want to ask what is everyone's like familiarity with like MEV in general, right? You can put it in the chat or you can just like unmute and say anything. Everyone's unfamiliar? Okay, fair. So what MEV basically stands for, right? Oh, here, let me check the chat. MEV from okay, bet. Okay, so yeah, some of you here you already have a good idea what this is. So what it stands for, right, is minor and or maximal extractable value. So when it was first coined, it was minor extractable value because that's when Ethereum was a proof of work, but it since got changed to maximal extractable value now that, we're on proof of stake. And so I think the best way I've heard it described is MEV is a measure of the profit that a miner or a validator, sequencer, etc., can make through their ability to include, exclude, or reorder transactions with the blocks they produce. So it's a pretty abstract definition, right? So that's kind of why I wanted to go into some examples off the bat. And it's helpful to think of MEV, if you're familiar with like traditional finance, right? That's kind of like toxic flow, right? So if you're buying stocks from like the like New York Stock Exchange or something, usually it's like, first come, first serve in terms of when an exchange sees your transaction. But for, blockchains, it is determined by the miner, whoever's proposing to block them or the proposer, right? And you're paying gas fees as well. And there's some nuance into like how they include those transactions, what's optimal for them, but the power of the ordering of the transactions is in the hands of the miner and the proposer, which is like, pretty different from traditional finance. So ordering MEV is the most common type of MEV, and so this is derived from placing transactions in a block within a specific order, right? So this involves front running. So placing a transaction right before a victim or an uninformed transaction. Back running, which is the opposite, placing it right after. And then a sandwich attack, which combines both of the two. And I'll talk about that a bit more soon. And so, okay, so atomic arbitrage. This is the probably most prevalent form of MEV. And so what we mean by atomic here isn't necessarily like, nuclear. It just means that if your transaction gets included in the block, then it is guaranteed to make profit. So that is the meaning of atomic. If it's included, then you make profit. If it's not, then you won't, right? And so arbitrage, for anyone that's unfamiliar, it's just buying low and selling high, right? And so atomic arbitrage on chain is when let's say there's a pool on Uniswap for like ETH, where ETH is at $2,000, and then there's one on let's say Balancer where it's like 3,000. You buy on Uniswap for 2,000, sell on Balancer for 3,000, and instant profit. So that is one form of MEV, but it's contingent on you, buying when it's at 3,000 and selling when it's at or buying when it's at 2,000, selling when it's at 3,000, right? So that's contingent on getting your transaction in the block at the point where the prices are favorable to you. All right, next up we have sandwiching. So this is a bit more nuanced, right? So let's say somebody submits a swap. They want to swap a lot of Bitcoin for a lot of ETH, let's say like 100 Bitcoin, right? And they don't set slippage tolerance. And this is just also a good tidbit, right? If you use Uniswap regularly or like any other type of DEX, uh, they have a slippage tolerance for swaps. And so all that basically means is you can set how much price impact you want your trade to have, right? So if you set your slippage tolerance to like 1%, that's basically saying that don't let my transaction execute if the price I'm gonna get is 1% worse than the price I'm seeing on chain, or not on chain, but on the front end, right? And so for people who are unaware of this, they'll submit, a very large swap. A searcher or someone who extracts MEV, that's what they call them, will see this swap, right? And first, what they'll do is they'll buy in the same direction that you're buying. So if you're buying Bitcoin immediately before your transaction, right, they'll buy Bitcoin. So that pushes the price of Bitcoin up, right? So then you buy Bitcoin at a worse off price than you were going to before. And then immediately after you buy it, they then sell the Bitcoin back into the pool. So it's another form of kind of like a riskless atomic profit if you can get those transactions in that exact order. And then now we have JIT, right? So this stands for just-in-time liquidity. And so this is specific to concentrated liquidity AMMs. So these are AMMs where you can provide liquidity in a specific range of prices, right? So on Uniswap V2, if you're a liquidity provider, you provide the same amount of liquidity on the whole curve, right? So whether ETH goes to zero or ETH goes to, like 500 million. But on UniV3, you can choose to only provide liquidity within a specific tick range. So I only want to provide liquidity when ETH is between 3,000 and $4,000, for example. And so just-in-time liquidity is when a large swap is seen within a specific tick range, right? Within one specific tick range. And this swap is large relative to the liquidity in that tick range, right? What somebody will do is they will provide liquidity in that tick range for just that swap, right? Collect the swap fees from that, withdraw their liquidity position, and then, basically collect the swap fees as profit. And so this is often done with flash loans. For anyone unfamiliar, flash loans are just basically what's the best way to put this? Oh, they're loans that you can take out with no collateral, right? But you have to return the loan within the same transaction that you take it out. So you can borrow like, $5 million and not and pay you can borrow $5 million, without having any type of money, basically, just the money to send the transaction, as long as your transaction returns that money with interest, that 5 million with interest by the end of your transaction, right? And so we often see this used for a lot of like hacks, like DeFi hacks. I think the Mango Markets hack, the Euler Finance hack, those were all using, flash loans because they allow people to, borrow this huge sums of money and return it within the same transaction as long as they make money in that transaction. And so just-in-time liquidity is a good example of this, of applying flash loans for MEV, extracting value out of the ordering of transactions. And then liquidations, this is a bit more nuanced. So if you have an on-chain loan, over collateralized loan, let's say on like a Aave, right? And then the loan to value ratio is like 1.2 or like 120%. So your collateral needs to be 120% of what you're borrowing. At least if that goes below a certain amount, then some of your collateral is up for liquidation, right? And so what the lending protocol will do is they'll basically allow anybody to buy some of your collateral at a discount and basically kind of like repay the debt that you have to repay back, right? And so this is a very common type of MEV as well. It's not necessarily a bad type of MEV because you want bad loans to get liquidated, loans with like bad debt. But yeah. And here, this one's a bit more interesting. It's kind of like in the niche of what we do at Sorella. So this is exogenous information MEV. So all this means is this is MEV derived not necessarily from the blockchain state, but from the state outside of the blockchain. Like what is Ethereum trading at on Coinbase, for example. And so centralized decentralized arbitrage is an example of this. And so Ethereum has 12-second block times as of right now. But in between those 12 seconds when a new block gets added, the price off chain is moving, whether it's on Binance or Coinbase or crypto.com. And so because of that, there's an arbitrage opportunity at the start of every block. And so this form of MEV, as we'll see, in a couple of slides, is actually probably one of the most profitable, like prevalent types of MEV and the most centralizing concern as well, right? And it's due to this discrepancy between the on and off chain price that occurs basically every single block. And the people who are losing here aren't necessarily the swappers, the users, but it's the LPs on chain because they're taking the other side of this arbitrage and trading at an uninformed price every block. And so, what basically, why do we care about this? And so this graph, this is I think this is from like April, this is when it ends. So this is the amount of MEV that was extracted or that has been extracted on Ethereum since the merge, right? And so as you can see, like most of it is sexdex arbitrage and atomic arbitrage. A lot of it is sandwich as well, and a little bit of a liquidation sandwiching. Just-in-time sandwiching and just-in-time sexdex, that's just basically incorporating just-in-time liquidity with those other strategies. But yeah, I think the big takeaway for this is, there is a lot of value to be had in MEV, right? And this is where, as we will see later, proposers make, the bulk of their profit. And so, how did this arise? When did people start talking about this? When did you start researching this? So it all started with this paper. This I think got released in early 2020, I'm pretty sure. It's called Flash Boys 2.0, right? And so the people who wrote this were actually the founders of Flashbots. And so basically what this paper talks about is how these guys basically researched these bots, right, on the Ethereum mempool that would basically compete to capture arbitrage opportunities on chain, right? And so how they would do this is through priority gas auctions, which we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, this paper was really, it put people onto the concept of MEV, really popularized it and also coined the term MEV. And the title of the paper is in reference to like high frequency trading in like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And so they were trying to draw a parallel between, how that space and finance is very similar to this one. And so pre-merge, what we had in the MEV landscape was priority gas auctions, right? And so up until about like late 2021, MEV was competed for in the public mempool. So searchers would spam the mempool of transactions, right? And back then, when it was, proof of work, the miner didn't really they placed transactions in the order that from highest gas fee to lowest, right? So they would just see what's the transaction with the highest gas fee, put that first, put the second one second, put the third one third, right? And so because of this, searchers would spam the transaction or spam the mempool with transactions with slightly higher gas fees, every block, just to ensure that their transaction would be the first or the second in the block. And so what this did was this congested the mempool and this raised gas fees hella, so if you were on chain back then, you remember, the big NFT craze like DeFi summer. A lot of that was because a lot of those like high gas fees was because there was more, natural like organic use on chain, but also it was because of these priority gas auctions and these searchers, these MEV extractors, taking advantage of this uninformed flow of people who aren't necessarily trying to make money off arbitrage. They're just trying to, transact on chain. And so Flashbots arose to basically solve this problem, right? And so their primary focus was to enable permissionless, transparent, and a fair ecosystem for MEV extraction, right? And so they started this off with MEV Geef and MEV Relay. And so what MEV Geef was basically it was an implementation of Geef, like the like node software, right? That basically allowed miners to hook up to a relay where instead of searchers sending their MEV transactions to the mempool, they would send their MEV transactions to this relay, right? This relay would ensure that the transactions, were valid, they wouldn't revert, and then they would then send those transactions to the miner, who would then, collect the gas fees and then construct a block from these transactions. And another nuance to this is that this introduced the concept of bundles, right? So now searchers, instead of submitting individual transactions, what they would do is submit bundles. So a bundle is basically a set of transactions that has to be executed in a specific order or else it won't execute. So for example, like a sandwicher, right? If they would submit a bundle that had their first swap, then the victim swap, and then the back run after that, right? And so that bundle would only get executed as long as those three transactions were in that exact order. And so this increased the efficiency of MEV by a lot, because instead of trying to have to like, guess where the victim transaction was going to land in the block, and then, adjust your gas fee based on that. You could just, put it in a bundle and say explicitly, I want these three transactions in this order. And also this got rid of, a lot of the congestion on the mempool as well. So MEV Relay, it was a big hit, a big success at first, right? But it now forced miners to become searchers, right? So now, instead of miners just being focused on pushing the chain forward and trying to build a proper block, right? You're thinking, what is the best way to combine these bundles to extract the most value, to make the most profit. And so this, this is some misaligned incentives. People were talking about this, and there's also the big centralization concern of, the only people who have the, you know, algorithms and shit to be able to extract this MEV the most efficiently are, big high frequency trading firms or these big firms with, like, a lot of capital, right? And the whole point of the blockchain is to be decentralized, especially in the validator set. And so the solution to this was, talked about both on the protocol level and, on the app level with Flashbots. And the plan was MEV boost and proposer builder separation. So MEV boost was activated, immediately after the merge, basically. And so what it basically what it allows is multiple independent relays, right? So instead of the one relay operated by Flashbots, now there's something like 7 or 8 that are operated by, a bunch of different parties, blocks, root, ultrasound, etc. And the also have different forums, right? For the auction. And then separate the key thing for this too was the separated block building from block proposing. So instead of the proposers being the ones who constructed the blocks, who placed the bundles in order, right? This was outsourced to builders. And so this flow chart kind of gives a good idea of how MEV on Ethereum works now, right? I think this bottom one is pretty good. So you have a searcher. Do you see a victim transaction? Do you want to submit a bundle, right? Do you send it to a block builder? It could be multiple or it could just be one, right? This block builder then tries to build the most profitable block possible, sends the block to a relay. The relay first ensures that these blocks are valid blocks, right? They will be valid blocks. Then they send the most profitable block to whoever the proposer is for that slot. And so, this is kind of where we're at with MEV right now in terms of what is the current solution? It is proposer builder separation. But I think a big question here is, and something that I think I'll get into a lot more in the second section is, where is this value going to, right? Like we know it's getting extracted, we know how it's getting extracted with PBS, but where's the value going to at the end of the day? And as we can see in this graph, it's mostly going to the proposer at this point. There's a bit going to the builder and a good proportion going to the searchers as well, right? But the bulk of it is still going to the proposers, the vast majority of it. And to be fair, these are the people, the entities who are like keeping the chain forward, pushing the chain forward. But where is all this value being derived from? I think, in the case of sandwiches, it's the uninformed users. It's like regular people who just want to use the blockchain. In the case of SexDex arbitrage, it's on-chain liquidity providers, people who are allowing, the crypto markets to be liquid on-chain and for DeFi to be, a thing. And then this is another graph of builder profit since the merge. So non-MEV profit, so and versus MEV profit, mostly MEV. Um, this is the distribution of profit among builders, right? And so a lot of this doesn't really like, have too much meaning, except for I want to highlight the fact that Beaver Builder is 27.4% of the profit out of all the builders, right? And this is important because Beaver Builder is an example of an integrated builder. And so what an integrated builder is basically a proposer who builds their own blocks, right? They run both a proposer and a builder. And so proposer builder separation was supposed to solve this problem, right? Of separating block building and proposing. But we still see it arising with integrated builders. And as you can see, like take the majority of the profit uh due to, kind of being their own middleman, and being able to build blocks themselves in the most efficient way, and also build blocks, right up until the point where they have to propose them. So it decreases a lot of latency for them if they're not waiting to get the block from the relay. And so now this dark forest, it's like illuminated, right? But we're seeing a lot of cracks in it. We're seeing a lot of inefficiencies. So one, it's the fact that PBS is not really a proper solution at this point for MEV. Two, the value that is getting extracted from MEV, it is getting extracted from regular users and on-chain LPs, and yet they receive none of this value back. And then also there's this big question of MEV on L2s, centralized sequencers, and also MEV cross-chain, right? Like how is that gonna function? And so I think a big takeaway from this, I want people to have is that MEV can never really be solved. There will always be value to be extracted from transactions, right? And the order you put them in. So the question now is what is the best way to mitigate, recapture, and redistribute this value? And so in the next session, I want to go deeper into, what's the future of MEV right now? What are the different methodologies, the different thought processes around where we should capture MEV and how we should do so. But yeah, I also wanted to mention thank you for your time as well. And I wanted to mention that if you are concerned about getting sandwich, for example, I'll drop a link to uh RPCs you can put on like your MetaMask wallet that basically send your transactions to searchers who will only backrun your transaction. They won't front run it. And sometimes you'll actually get an MEV like kickback, like a reward from that as well. And so this prevents your transaction from being exposed to MEV, and it also, well, it mainly just does that. But yeah, yeah. So that's basically all I had to share with the slides. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yes, hello.
Mhm.
I have a question here.
Yeah, that's cool.
I would like you to go through the parts again where you are talking about the fluctuating value in decentralized exchanges.
Between centralized and decentralized?
Yeah. I didn't quite get that.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay. Um, Hufflepuff, I saw your question. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so Sextex arbitrage, oh, here's a good example of this. So this graphic's actually taken from Serla's website. I'll just open it here. Yeah, so you can think of this as a off-chain on centralized exchanges. Prices are updating every 10, 100 milliseconds. But excuse me, on-chain, it's every 12 seconds, right? So the blockchain is basically slow in the sense that it has to update its price every 12 seconds and only every 12 seconds, right? Where off-chain, the prices are changing, much faster. And so this is just another form of arbitrage, but it's not necessarily atomic because the profit that you gain from this is kind of dependent on a lot of different assumptions, which one of those is called markout time. So after let's say this arbitrager captures this arbitrage at let's say block 101, the buy on chain and then the sell off chain at a higher price. Um, how their profit is calculated is dependent on what price they choose to use off chain, right? And so some people use the price that they sold at. Some people use the price 2 seconds after, 5 seconds after. It depends on a lot of different assumptions. So yeah, and this MEV was actually I feel like very underlooked until about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, right? And yeah, now we're seeing a lot more interest in it with something like Uniswap before. Um yeah. Oh, this is a perfect opportunity to talk a little bit about Sorella. So basically what we do at Sorella is try to solve MEV specifically for AMMs, right? And so when we started, it was originally for this problem of sexdex arbitrage. So this value is quantified called using a term called loss versus rebalancing. So the value extracted in this is basically calculated through um like delta hedging your liquidity position, or basically like taking this like if you were an on-chain LP, right? if you capture this arbitrage every block, how much more money would you be making? And so we set out with basically, trying to solve and quantify this problem. And so now the main product Angstrom is going to be a hook on top of Uniswap V4, which basically holds an auction for the very first swap in a pool. And so this forces the arbitrageurs to compete against each other to return as much of the profit back into the pool as possible. And so instead of the auction happening on the blockchain level, right, instead of the protocol level, where the auction proceeds are going to the proposer, now the auction proceeds are going to back into the pool, back into the LPs. And so this is one kind of like perspective on how MEV should be solved. It's called like app specific sequencing or AS. Uh, but there are differing methodologies and different viewpoints. Like I know Flashbots, for example, takes a lot more of a protocol level approach on this. So yeah. Um, any other questions about sex-dex arbitrage?
There's a question on the chat.
Okay. Um, how can security research play a role in MEV? Great question. Okay. I think there's a non-trivial kind of intersection between MEV and like exploits, right? Security exploits. I think a good example of this would be like the Mango Markets exploit, where they basically utilize a flash loan to artificially inflate the price of some assets and then basically like drain a whole lending market. So I think as a security researcher, I think being or tapping into MEV, the different forms of MEV and how these play out in the market, I think is vital and would uh give you something that I feel like is underlooked a lot in the sense that, it's one thing to look for codes and bugs in code, but there's another thing to look for, bugs in the market design or the system behind these protocols. And so I think, you know, auditing contracts with, MEV in mind is essential. But I think if you want to get more into that, Flashbots is like the perfect resource for that. So I'd say these first two links, just dive deep into any of the resources they put there, and I think that will set you up right. Seems validators and users' motives are antagonistic. Um, in a sense, yeah. In a sense, they kind of are. And so yeah, yeah. I think there is like a philosophical discussion to be had there, and that, is this always going to be the case no matter what? Just off the cuff, I feel like with app specific sequencing, this kind of um I wouldn't say it aligns their motives, but I guess it kind of like negates the fact that maybe they aren't aligned with the idea that once you let apps order their own transactions, it doesn't matter if the validator wants to extract as much profit as possible, if they're given bundles of transactions to execute instead of like reordering the transactions themselves, right? But yeah, no, that is a good point. That is a good point. Like the validator wants to extract as much profit as possible from the ordering of transactions, while users want to get, the best price execution. And a lot of the times that's like, a zero-sum game. Like somebody's always going to be on the losing end of that. So rebalancing. Yeah, I got you. So hmm. Oh, you can so when you're providing liquidity on Uniswap, right? You're providing liquidity for two different assets, right? So you're holding reserves for or a certain amount of reserves for these two assets. And depending on the activity in the pool, the trading in the pool, right? How much you hold of each of those two assets changes. So if you first provide for 1,000 Bitcoin and let's say like 500 ETH, right? If people take out a shit ton of Bitcoin but put in hella ETH, then you might end up with 3,000 ETH and then like I don't know, like 5 Bitcoin. And so the idea of loss versus rebalancing is instead of rebalancing through the AMM curve through like, X times Y equals K, what if you rebalanced instead through taking the off-chain arbitrage, right? So trading at the informed price every block. So let me go back to here. So like instead of trading at this price, at block 101, trading at that price for block 102, what if instead you traded at the price with the blue line, the sex price? So yeah, the equation for that metric loss versus rebalancing is actually proportional to the square root of the block time and then the realized volatility of the asset. So the more volatile your asset, the more you're exposed to loss versus rebalancing, and then also the longer the block time is, the more you're exposed to it as well. So how are LPs losing? Can you elaborate on that? Good question. So they are losing in the sense that they are trading at uninformed or misinformed prices, right? At stale prices. And so this isn't necessarily a problem because the arbitrage is happening, right? We want these prices on chain to converge or on and off chain to converge. But the problem is that, when the arbitrager sees that this asset is this low on block 104, right? Off chain, but it's this high on chain. What they're basically doing is they're selling this asset to on-chain LPs at a way inflated price, like a much more inflated price than what it actually is. And so the LPs aren't necessarily losing uh through direct profit. It's not like these arbitrageurs are taking money directly from them. They're just kind of losing in terms of opportunity cost in the sense that if they were market making in a more efficient way with the more informed price, then the would be making more money off swap fees, or not just off swap fees. So if you made trades that would reduce your losses because sex arbitrage not automatically instead of depending on X times Y equals K. Yeah, good point. Good point. I think a lot of crypto market makers, that's what they kind of do at this point. Where if they're market making on chain, they'll also have another like portfolio off chain that is kind of like hedging against that and is rebalancing and reducing the losses because of sex arbitrage. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of people, active market makers who do that. I know there's also some DEXs, some AMMs who actually do this rebalancing strategy for LPs. Sorella, we kind of take the viewpoint that this is best solved through auctions, through kind of selling the right to arbitrage this pool and then returning that profit back to the LPs. But yeah, that is a very viable solution as well, and that is something that a lot of people do right now. But it is you kind of have to. It requires like a lot of sophistication and like active management of liquidity, and I feel like the whole innovation, the exciting thing about shit like Uniswap or AMMs is the fact that it allows people to liquidity provide passively. So I think trying to find solutions that doesn't force LPs to be active in their liquidity providing is essential as well. And there's absolutely that, but too. Good question. So it kind of depends on what your flavor of app specific sequencing you want to implement. I forget what this protocol is called, but I know there's Spire. Spire is actually they're a cool protocol that is basically trying to build based rollups where rollups that are basically implementing app specific sequencing, but on like, the L2 sequencer level, right? And so they're taking the view that sequencers for specific L2 should be the one that order transactions and then return that MEV to users. But also there's the viewpoint that, apps should as well. And there's a lot of different ways apps can sequence their transactions. For example, like Hyperliquid, for example, they're creating their own app chain. So they're just kind of, taking it from the protocol level and, building their own kind of like L2 blockchain. But Sorella is taking the viewpoint of doing it at the dApp level, with like the hook on UniV4. So I think next talk I'll definitely get more into this on like how different flavors of ask, the different flavors of how MEV is solved nowadays. So yeah. Or not solved, but mitigated, redirected.
Hey, John, thanks for that session. Can you confirm that we're having like a second one, a follow-up?
Yeah. Yeah. Is next week good? Like around the same time?
Next week should be good. So that's what, Friday, 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in case anything changes, I'll let you know.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks for making the time, man.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your time, especially on a Friday. I know, you guys are trying to get out the office, so appreciate you guys sitting down, being patient, and asking questions as well. Hope to see you next week. Have a good weekend.
Cheers, bro. Talk to you soon.